I'm feeling a little bit nervous, especially after the group that was just on, because I think maybe they should have gone on a bit longer and entertained you a bit more. But anyway, it's really such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for you and your team, the PFP team, for inviting me, and thank you for all of you who are here. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to address the people who are building up the foundation of a nation. And I don't say that lightly at all. This morning I was speaking to a group of business people in Johannesburg at the Business Excellence Forum. And I was actually saying to them that every single one of those people who was at that forum has come through a teacher and a schooling system at some point. And the fact that we might end up in the corporate world with all sorts of fancy positions and fancy titles, but at the end of the day, we still owe the foundations of where we've come from a teacher, a headmaster, and a school. And that is the common denominator that we all have. And therefore, thank you for the work that you do as teachers and headmasters so tirelessly, and I believe sacrificially, because you do not get paid what you're supposed to be paid. And the sad thing about it is somehow the world has gotten things very upside down, where value in terms of the value of people when it comes to monetary value has somehow been turned upside down. With the people who are giving service, educators, nurses, police, the people who sacrificially give their service somehow end up at the bottom of this pyramid of value in terms of how the world now attributes value. So thank you so much for doing what you do so sacrificially. As somebody who's gone through the education system, somebody who's been in business and doing business, I'm extremely grateful to each one of you. So thank you very much. Today, I want to talk a little bit about celebration, leadership, and motivation. And I think before I get into that, let me maybe just share a little bit more about myself, a bit of my story, and then I will navigate you through what we want to talk about through the lens of a little bit of my story. So, as has been introduced, my name is Patrick Kuwana. I'm actually Zimbabwean by birth. I'm a computer engineer by background. That's what I trained as. And I came to South Africa in 1994. My first job here was with Denel, part of the Armscor group in Pretoria, as a computer engineer. And I worked for Denel for a couple of years and then moved on to HP, where I then moved more out of the engineering field and went more into the commercial field. And in the commercial field, I ended up rising up the ranks and heading up the telecommunications division for Africa for HP. And then I joined Oracle, the software company, where I was a strategic projects director in Oracle. And then my last corporate job was with another USA multinational computer sciences corporation, where I headed up one of their divisions here in South Africa. 2005, I left computer sciences and I started a small investment company. And through that investment company, I was involved in a number of joint ventures and a number of startups that I led as part of this joint venture. So if any of you are big into sport and you watch your Super Sport, SABC, it comes up with this player has touched the ball 20 times, this team has X amount of possession. That is a system that we developed in 2005 together in a joint venture with a UK-based company. We also started packaging sports content and sports information and delivering that on your mobile phone. So if you typically signed up for a sports mobile service on Vodacom, etc., we were typically supplying all of that to your mobile operators. So that's a little bit of what I was doing on the entrepreneurship and the business side. 2010 into 2011 was the second big watershed moment for me. But the biggest watershed moment for me was probably in 2005, where in the height of all of this, what I've just described in my corporate career, which seemed to be extremely successful when you look at it at face value, reality hit me as I was sitting in Santon Clinic in Johannesburg, waiting for the results of an AIDS test, because my life I had made that one step further in a promiscuous life and a reckless life. I had gone too far with what I valued as being important, but I had also gone too far with the infidelity in my marriage. And because of unprotected sex, one of the things your mother said you mustn't talk about, I was now in a position where I seriously thought that I was staring an HIV case result coming back. And as I sat in that room, I basically said to God, please may this test come back negative. And if it comes back negative, I'll do anything that you tell me to do if it comes back negative. Part of the things I wrote down were 5 major things that I wrote down at that point. The first was, I said I would do everything possible to come clean with my wife and to do anything I could possibly do to mend our marriage. The second thing I said was I would do anything possible to rebuild the relationship with my children, especially my eldest boy, who had experienced a lot of my unacceptable behavior. Because my boy, unfortunately, went through the pain of being an enthusiastic grade 1, grade 2 child, inviting his father to come and watch his football match. And because I was so busy with other things, I'm the sort of dad who would promise that I would be there. And on the Wednesday, when he's playing his match, I would not be there. And he would come back home and would say, but Dad, we had a really good game. I know you're really busy, it's okay. We've got another match next week. Are you going to come next week? And I would say to my son, yes, son, I'm going to be there next week. And the following week, I would not be there. And he would come back and he would say, Dad, it's okay. I know you're busy. You won the game. I scored the goal. Will you be coming next week? We've got another game. And I would say to him, yes, son, I'm going to be there. The next Wednesday, I wouldn't be there. And eventually, my son came back to me one day and he said to me, Dad, it's okay. I know you're very busy. You don't have to come to my matches at all. I know you're very busy. So I wrote down and I said I needed to mend the relationship with my son. The third thing I wrote down is that I needed to come clean in my business activities, because this investment company that I've just talked to you about, there was a lot of unethical behavior on my part in terms of how I was putting together some of the deals that I was putting together. And at that point I realized that I needed to make right with people who I had not done what is right with. The fourth thing I put on the list was that I wanted to make a difference, even if it's one person at a time, to address systemic poverty. Because for me, driving past the townships and seeing that squalor that we see, that is not normal. And we should never allow it in our minds, for our minds to think that that's normal. Because when you think that something is normal, then you won't do anything about it because it's normal. And therefore it's not normal. What we see around us in South Africa is not normal. And because it's not normal, we need to do something about it. The fifth thing that I wrote down was that in whichever way I wanted to make a difference to the narrative of the continent of Africa. The narrative that we have, that we are such a broken continent, the face of systemic poverty, the face of disease, the face of everything that goes wrong socio-economically seems to have an African face to it. That for me, again, was not normal. And I realized that for as long as I accept that, then I'm not going to do anything about it. And for as long as we accept it, we're actually not going to do anything about it. Those are 5 things that I had. To cut a long story short, in a process of a couple of years, I sat down with my wife. I told her exactly where my life was, what was happening. And I saw the power of forgiveness through my wife. Undeserved forgiveness from my wife. And over a few years, I saw unconditional forgiveness and love from my son. And as I went further, I realized in 2011 that I needed to make things right on the business front. And therefore we made a decision with my wife that we would actually give away this investment business, this business that I've just spoken to you about. We would actually give it away to all the people that we had done wrong to as a sign of restitution and to ask for forgiveness, and not to continue with anything that we had gained unethically. So we did that. So by the end of 2012, we didn't have a business, we didn't have a job, we didn't have income. And we went through a period where we pretty much lost just about everything that one can lose. So when I hear you talking about your, what is it, the Vivo Golf, what was it? There's a time where that was a very good car for me, even if I had that. Because at the time, we really went through quite a tough time. But at the same time, there's a lot of wisdom that I started to understand and gain during that period. And it's part of that wisdom, largely not mine, that I maybe want to share with you a little bit this evening. That you as teachers who are influencing people at the foundational level, where it's so key for that influence to come in positively, that maybe there's some lessons that you might be able to pick up from what I'm going to talk about. Let's see, is this working here? Okay, there we go. So, I truly believe that the prosperity of any nation is directly linked to the nation's ability to create a functioning education system that has functional headmasters, that has functional teachers, that will produce functional citizens out of the education system who will go into the society and be able to make an impact in society. So again, when I hear of a lot of the ills that South Africa is facing, again, I look back and I say to myself, are they really paying enough attention to where the foundational starting point is for this nation to be able to rebuild? Because if you see where South Africa is today, part of the reason why South Africa is where it is today and the damage that South Africa incurred, especially during the time of apartheid, is Bantu education. And that is the legacy that South Africa is still carrying even today, and the fruit of what we are seeing is largely the fruit of a completely dysfunctional education system. And in fact, even still, sadly enough, even in a lot of African countries, there is still dysfunctional education systems that have not moved forward with where society is today. So I do a lot of advisory work with leaders, but also looking at new economic models. And a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to sit with the finance minister of Ghana. Ghana is the first African country that obtained independence 60 years ago. And part of the conversation we were having, I was asking him the question, how has Ghana's education system evolved from the time of colonialism until now? And the truth of the matter is that not much evolution has taken place. And the question I asked him was, do you realize that the education system that was put in place during colonial Ghana was an education system that was purposely focused on creating good workers and not owners of resources? Do you realize that the education system that Ghana had before independence was an education system that was never intended for the indigenous Ghanaian to aspire to be an entrepreneur or an owner of economic assets or resources? It was an education system that was supposed to raise up subservient workers because you were never required to own anything. And if you are still running that same system, but expecting your economic growth to come from entrepreneurship and small business development, then you're not looking at the source of where you need to start building your nation from. And perhaps you need to stop everything else that you're doing and come back to the source and start to build a plan that you implement over the next 15 years. But it has to start with, what is it that you're teaching your children? Because if you're not teaching them the right things, if you're teaching them to be good workers, to be good managers and not leaders, and not owners of economic resources, then perhaps you're teaching them the wrong things. Then perhaps all you're doing is you're creating students with a lot of degrees and a lot of educational qualifications who enter into a market without any jobs. But meanwhile, you're talking about entrepreneurship. Again, I sense that maybe South Africa has a similar problem. So, at the end of the day, education and the economy are absolutely linked. And again, I don't say it lightly when I say the people who are sitting in this room today, I wish there will come a day where the leaders in this nation will truly understand the level of investment that they should be making in you, so that the very things that they're talking about in the National Economic Development Plan can become reality. Because for as long as that doesn't happen, that plan will remain a pipe dream. That's the reality. So it's just so important for us to understand these things. And what I really want to talk about is so what is the role, what is your role as leaders? Because I believe you're not just leaders as teachers, you're transformational leaders. What do I mean by transformation? It's got nothing to do with black and white. The real definition of transformation is about how do you move anything to a higher level of effectiveness. How do you completely metamorphosize something that it looks completely different to where it started off from? How do you take a child and develop a child through a transformation process so the end product is completely different to what the starting product was, but there's such a higher level of effectiveness? How do you take a nation and transform a nation from low effectiveness to high effectiveness? That's what transformation is all about, and that's what real leadership is all about. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to be doing a little bit of teaching here as well, because I'm hoping that there may be some tools in here that will be useful for you. So what's the real role of leadership? Leadership is to take people and organization from here to there. There's movement. Leadership is about movement. See, the difference between leadership and management, leadership is about moving things forward to a different level of effectiveness. Management is about making sure the current works well. And therefore, in any given society, we need the right mix of leaders and managers. Because when something is set up, you need managers to make it work well. But at the same time, you need leaders who are actually asking questions and saying, but hang on, even though this is working well, how can we make it work better? That's what leadership is all about. How do I look at the next thing? So leadership is about what is the desired future? So again, you as leaders, in whichever area that you're in, whether it's your classroom, whether it's your school, be asking that question. What is the desired future? What is the vision that you have? Because again, without a vision, the people perish. So once we understand desired future, the next thing is about, so what's the current reality? Because as a leader, we need to be very honest with assessing where we are right now. Because if we have a vision without understanding where we are right now, then we can't put together a roadmap as to how we move from here to there. We need a starting point, but we need an ending point. But we also need to understand what are the constraints, what are the barriers that are sitting in the way? And therefore, how do we deal with those constraints and those barriers? And often what I tend to say to leaders is that if we can understand this little cycle and employ that cycle in everything that we're doing, we will start to get away from the syndrome that we seem to have as a disease at times of having indaba after indaba, indaba after indaba, talk shop after talk shop with nothing actually ever being done. Because we are not structuring what we're doing into a way that says, where do we want to go? Where are we? What are the constraints? Let's now put a plan of action to deal with them. And once we put that plan of action to deal with them, what is our real role as a leader? The purpose of leadership is about influence. And influence starts with casting vision. As leaders, your number one role is to carry a vision and to be able to articulate and cast your vision. As you cast your vision, you then move into a servant role where you now serve the people that you are influencing. You help the people understand what is their role in this vision. What are their roles and responsibilities to make this vision happen, to participate in the making of this vision and getting to the desired future? As leaders, we also have to take the responsibility to make sure that people are taught, trained, and equipped and empowered to be able to do what they need to do. And then we need to let them go and do it, but also complete the cycle by evaluating them. This is what the purpose of leadership is. Because once we put these things, these type of structures in place, now we can begin to talk about responsibility and accountability. I hear a lot of talk about accountability. Accountability will not fall from the sky. It's an intentional thing. You need to put a system of accountability in place, otherwise accountability will not happen. Whether it's at a group level, even personally, as a leader, self-leadership is critical. And you need to be held accountable to yourself as a leader. But you need to be held accountable for your leadership amongst other people. And by the way, what I'll also do is I'm very happy to leave the slides with you. So if you have people's email addresses, you can share those slides with them. So again, just very quickly, the path to desired future. Where do we want to go? Where are we right now? What is stopping us from moving forward? Critically, the other fourth element that so often trips us up is that the reason why we often battle to deal with the constraints is that there's so much historical legacy baggage that we still carry. And for as long as we are still carrying the historical legacy, our minds will be the constraint for us moving forward. So therefore, a lot of the work that we do in the corporate sector is centered around what is the historical legacy, what has happened in the past that is still influencing the way that we think today. Because if we're able to unpack that, we will get to the point of understanding why we are having so much difficulty with dealing with the constraints that we need to deal with. So again, for you as leaders, this might just be a very simplistic framework that you can be thinking about all the time as you go about doing what you are doing. What is the desired future? What is the current reality? What are the constraints? What are the historical legacies? What has happened in the past that is still influencing the way that we're thinking right now? Because if we can change that thought, perhaps we can now approach the constraint in a different way. And we can now break the constraint and move ourselves forward. But you see, before we even talk about organizational leadership, it's absolutely critical to talk about self-leadership. Because self-leadership is actually where everything starts from. To be able to influence people, you need to be absolutely in a place where you are leading yourself. And part of the reason why I shared my story with you is that I came to the realization that part of what was happening in my life and what was coming out of me that I was projecting even into my family was a result of I had not made the decision to self-lead. Everything else was wrong around me except me, or so I thought. But interestingly enough, everything was wrong right here. And when I could get to the point of reflecting on what was wrong right here, that was the starting point of being able to self-evaluate and start the process of self-leading so that I could become a leader to the outside world. Because you see, broken people will break other people. Hurt people will hurt other people. And therefore, even as leaders in your classrooms, please understand that if you bring personal brokenness into your classroom, your personal brokenness will project to the kids. If you are hurting, your hurt will project to the kids. It's just the way it is. That's why self-leadership is so critical. So we need to lead ourselves, we need to self-evaluate, we need to be very honest. Where are we as leaders? And are we leading from a place of wholeness, or do we need a bit of work ourselves before we can truly lead in the way that we should be leading? One of the things I also discovered is that I believe the greatest attribute of a leader is how you respond to any given situation. Leadership, it's about response. Whether negative, whether positive, whether what's going on around me is positive or negative, the critical thing as a leader is how do I respond? And my response as a leader will typically come as a result of what's going on inside me. If things are not well within me, you will see that very evidently in the response. And therefore, again, I say it, I'll try and see if I can share a little bit of a story, because we did a little bit of a school transformation project with one of the PFP schools in Pretoria, where we took them through a school turnaround project with all of their teachers, but really understanding leadership within the teachers, but how they take that leadership into the classroom and how they model it to the students. So I'll try and share a little bit more about that as we go. So intentionally controlling my thoughts and how I respond to situations is critical. As a leader, the other thing we need to realize is we are 100% in control of our thoughts. No one can make you do anything. It's 100% what we decide to do. The greatest liberator that we have is our mind. And again, part of the legacy of what has happened, especially around the African continent, is some of the structures that we've come out of, whether slavery, whether colonialism, whether apartheid. Unfortunately, we still suffer from the legacy of the mindset that is still caught in those systems. And that's one of the things that we need to figure out how we get resolved. Again, I truly believe if government were thinking very strategically, one of the key things that government would be doing is basically saying, how do we actually focus on the mindset? How do we focus on actually bringing people out of captivity of the mindset? Because a lot of our minds, because of the legacy of the past, a lot of our minds are still captured in the things of the past. And therefore the decisions that we are making, the reactions, our response to what's taking place around us is based on legacy issues. Okay. So, how am I reacting to events? See, events are taking place all around us. Each one of us have a particular lens that we see as things take place around us. Through that lens, we think. Often, there's perceptions, there's offense in our thinking. Why? Because I see things in a certain way based on the experiences that I've had. But the way I see things, is it necessarily the truth? Maybe not. But it's the way I see things. And therefore, it's easy to build up perceptions. And the perceptions drive our feelings, and our feelings will typically drive the behavior. So a lot of what we see is people behaving and reacting based on a lot of perceptions and offense because of the undealt with things that we carry around with us. So, what does this mean for us? We need to be very careful of the trap of perceptions. See, a perception is what I believe to be true about someone or a particular situation. But what I believe to be true about Desiree might not necessarily be true. But if I look at Desiree and I respond to Desiree through the lens of what I think to be true, it could be absolutely the wrong response. And again, I will share right at the end why I believe this racial thing that we are facing is one of the critical things that we need to get sorted out. And it's all sitting around how we see, how we perceive the offense, the brokenness of the past, and what we're expecting from each other that perhaps is coming from my own lens without the understanding of what's really taking place. The hardest part about listening is not to fill in the blanks with your perceptions, to clear the mind and be willing to understand something new. The reality of the matter is there are many people who are actually not thinking. What they're literally doing is they're responding based on impulse. They're responding based on reflex because they already have made up their minds what is going on and how they should respond without even thinking. One of the main things when we go into corporates, interesting enough, is that even in corporate South Africa, I truly believe 80 to 90% of people in corporates are not thinking. They're literally robots. They go into work every day, they follow a routine, they've seen it all before, and we've actually lost our ability to think. We don't think anymore. We literally go through the motions without thinking. And we need to learn how to think again. Because I truly believe we've lost the ability to think. The trap of offense. See, when we're offended, we can't see or think straight. It's literally a chemical reaction in our bodies. See, anger, offense brings about anger. There are three main things that cause anger: fear, frustration, and pain, either emotional or physical. Whenever we are in pain, frustrated, or fearful, we'll get angry. There's a chemical reaction that happens in the body when we get angry. The body, through the adrenal system, releases a chemical called epinephrine. Epinephrine gets kicked in, it hits the brain. what happens when epinephrine hits the brain, it literally causes the functional side of our brain to shrink from this size to this size. It's a safety mechanism. The brain is the most energy consuming organ in the body. So what happens is, the way we were created is that when we get fearful or angry, if there's a lion standing up 50 meters away, we are supposed to get fearful. Adrenaline, the epinephrine is supposed to be kicked in so that our brains, the rational part of our brains, gets very small because we don't need to think about it. But by the way, all the energy that's going to the brains now needs to go to the muscles so that we can respond to what we need to respond to. But sadly, that's exactly the same sequence of events that's taking place when we get angry with each other. Sure. So if you want to see a classic example of brains that have gone this small and muscles that have become very energized with no thinking, watch Parliament Channel. I kid you not. I'm telling you, when you watch what's going on in Parliament, it's exact play out of what I've just said. People's brains have literally shrunk to this small. The energy is all in their muscles. So what do? They throw chairs around. They are incapable of having a rational discussion because the rational part of the brain has completely shut down. It's just the way the human body works. Why am I making this point? I'm making this point because part of our self-evaluation as leaders is critically actually being able to say, you know what, and if you want to write this down, make a note whenever you get triggered into anger. Make a note of it. I was running a racial reconciliation workshop with the Kuwana University of Technology last week. And I was saying to them, guys, the best thing you can do for yourself is have a trigger notebook that you carry along with you all the time. As soon as you feel angry, write it down. But also write down what has made you angry. Is it something that somebody said? Is it something that you've seen? Write it down. Because what you're doing is you're starting to self-evaluate what are the things that are offending me, what are the things that are upsetting me, but why? Is it a perception? Is it something within me? The term I actually used with them, I said to them, every time your blood boils, write it down. Every time your blood boils, write it down. Because when you begin to understand and self-evaluate, but also take control of your emotions, over time, what actually happens is, as weird as this sounds, you can actually get to the point where the things that made you angry before no longer make you angry. Because you're now conscious of what's happening, but you're also assessing. If I get angry, the first thing I want to know is what has caused me to get angry. Is it something that somebody has said? Is it something that I've seen? What has caused me the anger? Then the second thing that I want to ask myself is, if I know that anger is caused by fear, frustration, or pain, I want to ask myself the question, which one of those three kicked in? And why did it kick in? Because when I start to ask myself questions, what I'm doing is I'm wrestling with myself so that I know better how to respond to the stimulus that's coming around me. If we can do that as leaders, and I believe that's potentially, I think, maybe even one of the big things that Nelson Mandela had. I really think he had a skill of being able, despite being in prison for 27 years and going through what he went through, he somehow had the skill to be able to step out in an audience and not be offended and not react in an irresponsible way, irrespective of how painful things that were being said were. He had the amazing ability to control his emotions and come out with the right response all the time. or at least most of the time. And that's a critical leadership skill that we need to have. Sadly, I think we are missing a little bit of that skill in government today, but anyway. Okay, when you're offended, you can't see or think straight. Thinking is to create something new, not replay something that is already stored in our memory. The reality is that most people don't think. They just take what is already in their memories and base their decisions and behavior based on that. We're not thinking afresh. See, if I remember my last encounter with Benjamin, I could very well be the next time I meet with Benjamin, depending on whether my last encounter with Benjamin was a negative one, I might very well be responding not to what Benjamin is saying right now, but to the offense that I'm carrying from the last time. And we do that a lot. And out of that, that's where we make bad decisions. Because we're not even making decisions based on what the real situation is. We're making decisions based on what we've already stored up in our memories and what we've already decided we're going to respond as. So again, as leaders, I really ask you, let's think. Let's think afresh all the time. Even if you offended me the last time, can I come to the table and give you the benefit of the doubt and hear you based on what you're saying right now? And make a decision based on what you're saying right now. Because again, I truly believe a lot of the decisions that are being made, even at high levels, and the reason why we're not moving forward as a nation is that we are so stuck in a cycle where we can't think beyond the last bad thing that happened. And unless we break that cycle, we're really not going to make too much progress. So how am I reacting to events? Here's another cycle. Let me ask you the question again. I'm just going to ask you questions here. As a leader, what are your values? What are your values? What are your core beliefs? What's your self-identity? Because you see, if I start to be able to be true to myself based on my values, my core beliefs, my self-identity, if I'm able to listen and ask questions. By the way, one of the most important leadership traits is asking questions and listening. Discovering new things from people. Because that puts you in a place where you can make decisions and think. It's also about humility and respect. How do I listen to your story before I make up my mind on what's going on? How do I listen to your experience? Because your experience of reality might be different to mine. You've experienced something that I've never experienced before. How can I put you in a box and say that my experience is the only right way when I've never heard yours? So as leaders, we need to be humble. We need to be able to hear the other side, listen, ask questions, and we need to respect. Because once we do that, we can now have truth and respect as a key thought process which drives our feelings, which drives our behavior. And by the way, anytime we behave, our behavior starts off with a thought. A thought will drive a feeling will drive a behavior. So if you want to analyze why you behave in certain ways, go backwards. What am I feeling? But what am I thinking when that thing happens? When I get angry, what am I thinking? What am I feeling that causes me to behave in a certain way? It's all about self-evaluation. It's about being true to myself. Do I change my behavior based on how others behave? See, if I have a core value that says respect is a core value for me, then does that mean if Melissa does not respect me, do I therefore throw away my core value and also not respect her? Or do I stick to my core value? Because you see, if I change, then it's not a core value to start off with. And therefore we need to ask ourselves the question, what are our core values? Because if respect is a core value, whether Melissa respects me or not, I need to respect you. You respect me, I respect you. You don't respect me, I still respect you. It's a core value. Are we being true to who we are? And therefore, again, as leaders, we need to be asking ourselves the question, are we leaders with integrity? If I say this is my core belief, my core value, do I stick to it? Because if I don't, maybe I need to cancel it as being a core belief and a core value. So my question to you as leaders, write down what your core values are, your core beliefs. In your little notepad, if ever you behave in a way that is outside of that list, ask yourself a question, what happened there? It'll help you even with the anger thing that I'm talking about, with the offense, with the perceptions. Something is not aligned when you behave in a different way to what you say your core belief is. You need to be able to analyze that and understand why that is happening. See, don't allow people to control your behavior. No one can make you do anything. See, do not allow other people to control how you behave. That is the ultimate level of slavery and bondage. You have a full functional brain. It is yours. Use it to the best of your ability. And let's not use the excuse that this child made me do that. A child cannot make you do anything. Another person cannot make you do anything. Benjamin cannot make me punch him. Irrespective of how much Benjamin might throw insults at me, swear at me, call me names, he can go to town. But this fist going across to his face is 100% my choice. 100%. 100%. Irrespective of what he said. Because you see, irrespective of what he's saying, it is still my mind that can process everything through the core value or a core belief. And I can then behave accordingly from there. Will I stick to my core value from my core belief? Here's one for me personally. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor, fellow man, and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love that is unselfishly seek the best or higher good for your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may show yourself to be children of your Father who's in heaven. I come out of that faith. I'm just sharing with you. I'm not here to promote my faith in any way. But if that's what I believe to be true, then that means that's how I should be behaving. But if I say that that's my core belief and I'm not behaving in that way, there's something seriously wrong that I need to relook. So am I being true to who I say I am? We need to constantly evaluate. Constantly evaluate. The thing that will stop us from constantly evaluating is pride. And again, when I look back at my life, my corporate career, where I thought I was before reality hit me, all I can say, it was a big P of pride. That's what led me down the path that I went through. Without commitment to self-leadership, one cannot become an effective leader of others. Without committing to self-leadership, one cannot become an effective leader to others. Why do you notice the small piece of dust that is in your friend's eye, but you don't notice the big piece of wood that is in your own? Why do you say to your friend, let me take that piece of dust out of your eye? Look at yourself first. You still have that big piece of wood in your own eye. You are a hypocrite. First take out the wood out of your own eye, then you can see clearly to get the dust out of your friend's eye. See, often we are so focused on trying to see the wrong in other people, but meanwhile we're not willing to actually turn around and look and see what's going on here. And when we are able to turn around and see what's going on here, it becomes so much easier for us to respond in appropriate ways, even if other people have things going on in their lives. So again, the question I really want to, you are nurturing the future of South Africa in your classrooms and in your schools. Even as your kids walk into that classroom, think about what you are saying to that kid, because even that child, you might very well be the single adult role model that that child possibly has. And if that child cannot be getting the right affirmations from home, you might be the only person who is going to give that kid an affirmation. But you see, if we are so hurt that our response, even to inappropriate behavior of the kids, goes around attacking their identity. You stupid child, what's wrong with you? We're killing our children. We're killing our children by doing that. Let's discipline them, but let's not kill their character and their identity. Children are so desperate to be affirmed. There's one quick story as I start to wrap up now. One quick story. We did some work here in Cape Town, interesting enough, with the taxi associations in the Delft area when they were going through some of their taxi wars about bringing reconciliation. And we did some workshops with some of the leaders. And there's one of the things we talked about with these leaders is the power of affirmations. You know, son, you've done so well, well done. Son, you've tried so hard, I'm proud of you. See, often, have you noticed how we can easily only speak to our children when there's something wrong, and we never talk to them when there's something right? We're quick to see the wrong, and therefore 90% of the time we speak to them when there's something wrong, but we never affirm when there's something right. And this taxi owner, after a couple of weeks after we had talked about affirmations, we met again, and he came and he said, please can I share a story with the group? And he says, you know what, I have I think an 8-year-old son at one of the schools. I actually wish I had taken down the name of the school. And he said, after the last time we talked about affirmations, about 6 weeks later, I was dropping off my son and the teacher said to me, please come in, I want to talk to you. And I went in and the teacher said to me, what have you done to your son? Your son has completely changed in the last 6 weeks. Something major must have happened. He was one of the biggest problem childs in class, but that has completely changed. And he said, I realized that when we talked about affirmations, I realized that as a dad, I had yet, in 8 years of my son's life, I had yet to say to my son, I love him. I had never said that to my son ever before. And now every morning when I drop him off at school, I tell him that I love him. And his attitude in school and his marks in school have changed. Because for the first time, he's getting the affirmation of a father. Powerful stuff. Let's affirm our kids. They so desperately need it. If they can't get it at home, please make sure they get it from you. Because then they won't get it elsewhere. Because you see, when a kid is not affirmed in the circle of people who are closest to him, he gets to a point where there's an affirmation deficit. Because we are created with the need to be loved. And when that doesn't happen with the people who are closest to us, our parents, our families, maybe even teachers, guess what will happen? When I'm sitting in the bar and the drugs are being peddled, and I take the drug, and the guys are encouraging me to take the drugs, well done, Patrick. Guess what? My affirmation tank that is completely depleted starts getting the affirmation in the wrong place. Then you wonder why the kid is addicted and why he doesn't come back home, because guess what? He's not getting his affirmation at home, he's getting his affirmation here. That's where he keeps going. Same thing. Sugar daddies, all these things, teenage pregnancies, etc. It's a result of girls desperately needing their affirmation tanks to be filled at the right place. But if it doesn't get filled at the right place, guess what? they will find it elsewhere. And guess what? There are people out there who know exactly how this works and how to actually manipulate this to make it work for them. Okay, so look at the weakness of others with compassion, not accusation. It's not what they are not doing or should be doing that's the issue. The issue is your own chosen response to the situation and what you should be doing. If you start to think the problem is out there, stop yourself. That thought is the problem. See, I really have so much hope for South Africa. And I have hope for South Africa because of the work that people such as PFP are doing. I have hope because there are people such as you who choose, despite the abuse that you get, to keep in the teaching profession. Because if you guys were not there, there would be absolutely no hope. No hope at all. There's hope because there are corporates, Alan Gray, who say, listen, we're going to put investment into this. Because we know we're investing in the very future. You see, the graphs that you are showing, if schools don't happen, guess where those graphs are going to go? Guess where the economy is going to go? But sadly, again, the system does not honor you in the way that you're supposed to be honored. So the last thing I just want to talk about here is that I'm not going to spend too much time on this. At the end of the day, we have to constantly think, how do we create value for every person in this nation? Because if we see, the reason why we've gotten so into this corruption and selfishness is that we've lost the understanding that for society to work, everyone in society needs to get the right value. If you don't create a value-creating system where everyone in the system is valued for what they do in the system appropriately, then the system will begin to collapse. And I think one of the things that we've done in South Africa, we've lost the ability to really articulate value to where value should be articulated. The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. And you see, with my past life that I shared with you, that's one of the things I also came to realize, that my future does not have to be defined by my past. But at any given moment, I have the choice to define what the future is for me and how I choose to use that future either selfishly or to contribute positively to society. And I believe each one of us is here for a reason to contribute positively to the building of South Africa. And I trust that at some point, sooner rather than later, the people right at the top in governmental structures will come to the realization that the way things are being done is absolutely not sustainable. And it has to be changed. So therefore, my last parting words to you as educators, again, thank you for who you are, for what you do. Please keep going, because if you're not there, then this country will really collapse. Do the best that you can. Self-lead. Deal with anything that you need to be dealing with internally. Hold each other accountable. But you know what? One of the most important things that I have also come to realize in my own journey, and this is what I'll finish off with. And again, I'm not here to convince you of what I believe or don't believe. I'm just sharing with you the journey from my side. But I came to understand If I truly believe that each person that I encounter, irrespective of where they are socially, economically, every single person I have the opportunity to encounter, if I truly believe that they are created in the image of God, irrespective of what their color is, what their language is, what their culture is, then I better give them the respect that they deserve. Because if I cannot respect them, then I completely disrespect the God that has created them. And I think if we can truly understand, if you share that core belief that people are created in the image of God, may that be the core value that leads us forward in terms of how we choose to think, feel, and behave towards each other in our diversity. Because if we can do that, then we can start to address what I believe is South Africa's biggest constraint right now, the disunity amongst the diversity that we have in this country. And if we can deal with that, I believe we can accelerate to levels that we have never thought to be possible. So again, I really thank you for this time. I've taken a little bit, went a little bit over time. I know it's time for you to get home, but I really thank you for your time once again. PFP, thank you. It's been such an honor being here, and I trust at some point we will get to meet again, whether it's in this lifetime or another lifetime, but I hope I'll get to meet you again. I love you all. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.